first speaker for today is Michael Kent, and will be presenting, When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a Cyberterrorist.
Thanks very much. Firstly, can everybody hear me? I presume so, because I've got amplification. Good. Cool. So, who am I? Why should you bother listening? What the hell are you doing here at 9 o'clock in the morning? You do realize it's 9 o'clock, you could be in bed now. You stupid, stupid people. Anyway, my name's Mike Kemp. As you may have been able to guess by the accent, I'm from the UK. I'm a co-founder of a small startup. We break things for a living, and I like generally causing trouble, which is what this talk's about. So, quick word of warning before we start. Firstly, there will be no O-Day in this talk. If you're expecting me to drop substantial amounts of O-Day, I would leave now and go back to bed, because that would be sensible. Additionally, please don't videotape this talk, because I will see how bad I look without caffeine and sleep. So by all means take photos, but please don't take videos. Okay, so a couple of quotes. One from our UK-based Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure. Hackers want to get into your computer systems and use them for their own purposes. Who knew? One from Ryan Lang, who's the Estonian Justice Minister, or was, talking about information warfare. Everyone should be worried, not just Estonia. And finally, quote from Die Hard 4, which, as I'm sure you all know, is highly representative of the real world, and not just the imaginings of a demented Hollywood screenwriter. Jesus Christ, it's a fire sale! Anyway, so, what am I going to be talking about? Well, I'm going to be talking about cyber terrorism. I am going to refer to it as cyber terrorism, because, you know, I can. I'm going to be talking about the claims that have been made about it, and some refutations for those claims. I'm also going to be talking about why the media is retarded, because it is. My apologies to any journalists in the room, but by and large, you people suck. I'm also going to be talking about an army of one. And I'm going to be talking about the various agendas and solutions to the problem, as it were. One thing to note, I've got about 90 slides to get through in an hour, so I will talk quickly, and if you don't understand, please feel free to throw money and or alcohol, and I'll maybe slow down. So, cyberterrorism means many things to many people. Basically, concerns about computer-borne attacks or disruptive computer attacks started in the 80s. Personally, I think Matthew Broderick's to blame, and it's all his fault. Concerns grew until 2000, when, you know, everybody got distracted by the Millennium Bug and planes were going to fall from the sky and we're all going to die. However, it really went mental after 9/11, because, you know, obviously, you know, people can fly planes into buildings. Obviously, they can blow up computers. It's a term that first was discussed very late in 2002 in an article, funnily enough, called Cyberterrorism, Fact or Fiction. As you may be able to guess, I know which side I'm on. So, according to Wikipedia, which, as you all know, is the font of all human wisdom in the world, a US company called Technalytics defines cyberterrorism as the premeditated use of disruptive activities or the threat thereof against computers and or networks with the intention to cause harm or further social, ideological, religious, political or similar objectives, or to intimidate any person in furtherance of such objectives. That's a mouthful. That said, there's also a degree of history between me and Kevin Coleman, who's the MD of Technalytics. Technalytics basically have got a nasty habit of making shit up, which I'll discuss later. So that may or may not be made up as well. I'm sure you're all familiar with the wonderful, wacky world of Dick Clark. Richard Clark, for those who don't know, was the ex-anti-terrorism czar for both George Bush Jr. and also Bill Clinton. He's been predicting an electronic Pearl Harbor that will destroy the Western world for years. That's what he does. In his latest opus called Cyber War, the Next Threat to National Security and What to Do About It, really uncontentious title there, basically he predicts that Chinese hacksaws can destroy the entire US infrastructure in about 15 minutes. Planes will stop flying, ATMs will stop working, gas refineries will explode, and the US will go back to the dark ages. Awesome. That said, he's also recanted his position on cyber terrorism and electronic Pearl Harbors and said, oh no, I didn't mean that. But he's not alone, in as much that the US as a whole can't even decide what conventional terrorism is, e.g. people with bombs. So you've got a different definition from the FBI, a different definition from the Department of State, and various definitions from the military. Now, personally, I might define terrorism as imperialists stomping around the world looking for cheap oil. But, I don't work for the FBI or anything. So, the point is, it's all semantics. If you believe the hype, and it's entirely up to you if you do or not, very bad people are going to do very bad things with computers and the sky will fall. Now, I would claim that most of the claims made about computer-mediated terrorism are insanely exaggerated and are bullshit. The problem is, cyberterrorism also encompasses the word cyber, which if you use it, and you're not being ironic, makes you sound like a bit of a retard. Now, I personally will define cyberterrorism as the use of technologies to facilitate acts of a terrorist nature. Simpler than the Technalytics definition. Now, I know that's somewhat nebulous. One thing, lots and lots of noise about information warfare. I love the Wikipedia article on information warfare, by the way, in as much that it states, the examples and perspective in this article deal primarily with the United States and do not represent a worldwide view. So, information warfare only happens in the US, apparently. Now, what I would claim is that cyberterrorism, if it exists, is part of something I'm calling the pyramid of annoyance. Now, Fox News and their village idiot Glenn Beck, who's a lovely human being, loves cyber-terrorists. Now, I'm loath to disagree with such an impartial source. Anyway, my pyramid of annoyance starts with vandalism, which is basically defacement, goes up to crime, which is taking your credit card details, goes up to espionage, which is taking your state secrets, up to terrorism, which is blowing your shit up to war, which is blowing everything up. Now, acts of computer-mediated terrorism, according to that, are conventionally seen as the last overt actions before all-out war. War is a fairly retarded thing to do. Now, I wanted in this talk to try and examine what risks are actually posed by, the supposed evil hacksaw terrorists. As an aside, as you may have noticed, I'm from the UK. Being from the UK, I'm part of the country that's the most surveilled nation on earth. And the UK has also introduced all sorts of fun legislation aimed at addressing terrorism, e.g. internment without trial and generally being dicks. So I wanted to try and examine threats. So, nice little cartoon there. So, first time I gave a very stripped down version of this talk at an organisation called the ISSA. I was told by a couple of people it was a dangerous talk and it would give people all sorts of the wrong ideas. Good. I would hope that you're sensible enough and adult enough to come to your own conclusions. I was also told that the UK media has calmed down a lot about cyber terrorism and, they're not talking about it so much. So, I did some analysis. As of April, the UK government announced £650 million that was going to be spent addressing computer-borne threats and developing offensive cyber war capabilities. There's also articles from later on in April, and also earlier on in April. Basically, my favourite one is the private sector has been asked to help fight cyber terrorism and other state-sponsored attacks by submitting traffic data to GCHQ. So, nice. To fight terrorists, GCHQ can now read my email. Not that they can't anyway, but, it's kind of bullshit. But yeah, my thing is, looks like the media have really calmed down. Now, I don't want to labour the point, but the media does report terrorism. That's why, weirdly, terrorists are terrorists. The way I think of terrorists is basically as rogue PR companies. PR companies want to shape opinion by, gain press coverage. That's what terrorists do. That's why they blow shit up, because it makes news. Now, I would argue that the Richard Clarke-based approach to discussions about this doesn't make sense in as much that if you're talking about planes falling from the sky and national CNI being destroyed in 15 minutes, that's really not defining risk, and it is a little bit hyperbolic. So we maybe calm the language down a bit. So, Awesome quote. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Very relevant when talking about this. So, talking about the past, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the history about what the shit's gone down. So, 98 saw the first reported act of overt cyber terror. Obviously, you could argue that, Hagbard and the like were cyber terrorists. I would say that's bullshit. I would say they were coke addicts who needed to fund the habit, but there you go. Anyway, 98, you had an organisation, best name in the world, or one of them, the Internet Black Tigers. That just sounds such an awesome name. Basically, they were a pro-Tamil group that, in furtherance of their aims, distributed about 800 emails a day to Sri Lankan embassies around the world. Now, their plan was to disrupt communications. Now, even in 98, when, Exim was shit and mail servers didn't work properly, 800 emails would not kill a decent mail server. 800 emails for a fortnight would definitely not kill a decent mail server. That said, they are frequently cited as the first cyber terrorists. No. Terrorists have to cause some effect. That's what makes them terrorists. Now, their actions caused no major outages, and thus were pretty crap. Also, not terrorists. So, if you're arguing that the IBT were terrorists, spammers are better terrorists. So, 1999, you had pro-Serbian hackers, the awesomely named Black Hand, versus NATO. NATO servers were again blocked with email, and allegedly there was some data exfiltration from the UK servers. Whether or not that was pro-Serbian hack source, who knows? That said, there were lots of viruses, pretty crap ones, and more importantly, bombs, which are a little bit more worrying, flying around the place. 1998, yes, I am talking about Moonlight Maze. According to the reports, US military computers were being targeted by Russian hacksaws. In 1999, Newsweek, which is an ever-reliable source of information and not at all biased in any way, shape or form, reported that according to the then US Deputy Secretary of Defense, the US was in the middle of a cyber war in 1999. I want to know who the fuck won. The scores were not declared. Is it Russia 1, America 0? America 1, Russia 0. Who knows? The scores never came out. 2005, news hit of Titan rain. Like the Russians before them, the Chinese thought, let's have a go at the US. Because, apparently owning the US by owning more US foreign bonds than any other country wasn't enough for the Chinese. Interesting, 2005, first use of the term APT. We love APT. It's such a ridiculous phrase. It means nothing, but you can sell anything using it. Basically, an advanced persistent threat, or absolutely pathetic tripe, is whereby there are evil super elite hacksaws with millions of ODA and they're going to fuck you up. No, bullshit. That said, 2009, the Chinese were back. 2005 wasn't enough for them. So they came back in 2009 with Operation Aurora. And according to McAfee, we are, as a result, all doomed. Unless people buy McAfee, the world will end. Now, call me cynical if you will. Both of those attacks and a couple of other ones all happened roughly around the same sort of time as RSA. Sales pitch? Not sales pitch. Don't know. So, this one's good, by the way. 2008, US 304th Mobile Infantry got bored of doing army stuff. 2008, the US Army had nothing better to do. They weren't at war or anything. So they decided to have a look at Twitter. Shall we go and blow shit up, or shall we look at Twitter? Now, they wanted to see how terrorist groups, or Al-Qaeda-like groups, use the internet, and also use mobile telephony, and could use social media. Their OSINT findings are on the internet, a couple of places, but that said, it's all fairly speculative reading. In the report, basically, they talk about pro-terrorist interfaces for your phone, so wallpaper. They also discuss methods by which mobile phones can be used to facilitate attacks. Yes, phones have GPS. Who knew? And they also talk about scary voice over IP voice changes. Pretty standard stuff. They also examine how Twitter could be employed by terrorists. I quote, this is a direct quote, "Twitter has become a social activism tool for socialists, human rights groups, communists, vegetarians, anarchists, religious communities, atheists, political enthusiasts, hacktivists, and others to communicate with each other and to send messages to a broader audience." My question is, which one are you? It's nice to see in this report that vegetarians and people interested in human rights are lumped in the same, in the same genre as terrorists. So, awesome. I'm vaguely anarchistic, vaguely vegetarian, and vaguely interested in human rights. Thus, I am a terrorist. Awesome. Now, basically, their assertion of the report is that social media can be used by terrorists to organize attacks or to conduct research. Well, yeah, it could, but they could also use carrier pigeons. Twitter's already had a number of legal issues. I refer you to the WikiLeaks debacle. The feds made a request, WikiLeaks gave it up to the press, embarrassed the shit out of the feds. That said, how many other requests have floated through under the radar? Now, if you're a terrorist, cyber or otherwise, you're probably patiently aware of the risks of using Twitter, which is very public, for doing anything other than propaganda. It seems highly unlikely in my head that anybody actively involved in terrorism is going to use Twitter as anything other than, the odd PR message. When it comes to organisation, they're probably going to use closed forums or RSE or whatever. That said, can Twitter be used for open source intelligence gathering? Yes, it can, but you have to read through a shitload of bullshit to get to anything useful. Can it be used to plan and schedule attacks? It can, but then so can coded messages on blog pages, etc. Coded message on the blog page. So, is social media a threat? Yeah, if you post details of truth movements or personal identifiable data. If you do that, you are a retard, by the way. It's not a threat if you post normal crap. Is it being used by terrorists as anything other than a rallying board? No, of course it isn't. That said, did the US 304th Mobile Infantry want access to Twitter in 2008? Yes, they did, so they came up with this report. So well done to them. Now, quick couple of words about North Korea, which I know isn't a terrorist organisation. I know this, I know. But this ties back to the Kevin Coleman thing I was talking about earlier. Now, apparently, according to conjecture, North Korea's got an uber-elite band of hackers known as Unit 21. Now, according to a report issued by Major Steve Sin, yes, there is a guy who works for the US military called Major Sin. I'm not making this shit up. Unit 121 has got 17,000 hackers. This was picked up by a guy called Kevin Coleman who ran with it and went, oh, the sky is falling. I've done some research on North Korea. They don't have an internet. They basically have a telephone system from the 1920s with mechanical switches or Alcatel digital ones, which are much the same thing. So, how the hell are they attacking anything? Magic? No. That said, if North Korea hasn't got super hackers, how come non-state groups, who are less well-funded than North Korea, even though North Korea is piss poor, how come terrorist groups have got them? So, that's where it gets slightly more interesting, depending on your view. I wanted to look at what an individual attacker could do. I wanted to look at what sort of information's out there, and from that extrapolate what a well-motivated and financed group could do if they actually knew what they were doing. Is anything illegal discussed? Yeah, of course it is. Has anything illegal been done to obtain this information? No, of course it hasn't, officer. Please go away. So what I did is I applied .mil ideas and the concept of open source intelligence gathering, which between you and me is basically reading the internet a lot. Awesome. So, incidentally, never use that line on a hooker. Just because you pay for it doesn't mean it's better. Never use that line. They don't like it. So, what can an individual attacker do? Lots of shit, like repeating slides. Now, anyway, quick thing. Some of this is just me ranting. So I haven't written anything incriminating down, so my apologies for that. So, as I'm sure you're patently aware, the UK plays a major role in international finance. There are lots and lots of theories about terrorists turning off the ATM network in the UK and grinding capitalism into the ground. Before we begin, quick tale of a payment processor. I was doing a gig with a payment processor, very big payment processor. They handled a lot of transactions for lots of merchants. They didn't know what their estate was. They had two IS managers, one who went off sick after having a nervous breakdown. He was replaced by another guy who 3 months later went off sick with a nervous breakdown. They had no fucking idea what was on their network. Could have been anything. Their major piece of client-side software, the thing that their merchants logged into to check where their money was, could be broken by using Dirtbuster in about 2.5 minutes. This is a major payment processor that A, don't know what's on their network, B, have nobody in charge of their network because they keep all having nervous breakdowns, and C, you can knock out core components of their infrastructure in about 10 minutes. Bit rubbish. Anyway, ATM networks in the UK are managed in conjunction with the banks and an organisation called Link. What Link did was get 38 banks and building societies together, get lots of independent ATM operators together and set up the Link network. Link network is bloody hard. Bits of it are air-gapped, it's incredibly paranoid, and it's basically a bit evil. Hence, easier to go after the ATM itself. Everyone, I presume, is familiar with skimmers. If you're not, those are skimmers. You can buy them on eBay. Well, you can't on eBay, but you can various message boards, and if you're really creative, you can get some epoxy resin, a fascia, and a mini card reader, and make your own. Project for the summer holidays. Awesome. Anyway, you could also go after the ATM firmware itself. Lots of people have. Barnaby Jack and his jackpotting ATMs, and also Raul Chiesa over in Italy, who decided to take apart various bits of Italian ATM networks, which I can't really talk about, but lots of people are doing it. As I said, if firmware and physical attacks are too hard, ATMs all have management modes. Most have default creds. With time, you could probably find out all the default creds for all the ATMs in distribution. In the UK, lots of places, pubs, clubs, newsagents, strip clubs, taxi ranks, some restaurants use Triton ATMs. Now, manuals are a piece to find. They're on attrition as we speak. And they have really retarded master passwords. We're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What a secure password. Or even better, 1, 2, 3, 4. Wicked. Now, that said, you can find manuals on eBay if you can't find the information online. And you usually pay about 14, 15 bucks. Said, why bother? In 2007, these three guys here, these three happy-looking lads, he's not been beaten by the police at all. They were convicted under the UK Terrorism Act. Their crime, apart from setting up the really quite retarded Al-Qaeda in Northern Europe, really, if you don't want to be surveilled, don't set up an organisation called Al-Qaeda in Northern Europe. People might get a bit tetchy about that. Was inciting terrorism using web forums. They also used low-level fraud to fund jihad. About more later. For those who don't know the story, the Three Stooges, as I shall refer to them, used known publicly distributed malware, no ODA, nothing, to keylog Windows PCs. They then acquired CCs, which were then filtered through gaming sites to learn to the source of where that CC came from. They then used the cash they got out, and this is genius, to buy tents, GPS, and other items that could be of use to jihadi types from Amazon. Amazon sponsoring jihad. Awesome. Now, were these wonderful, wonderful people that were using such advanced technology caught by sophisticated surveillance? No. They were caught because a guy called Mirshad Bektovic, who was a Swedish Bosnian terrorist, which is a really unusual combination. Swedish Bosnian terrorist. Okay. It's a bit like Dutch Ukrainian hacksaw. Anyway, he basically was arrested and had Suli's telephone number in his cell phone. So the Swedish authorities went, oh, hang on, who's this? And then told the British, who then, oh, look, he's buying tents off Amazon. and sending them to Afghanistan. How did that happen? Oh, he's got an organisation called Al-Qaeda in Northern Europe. Maybe we should watch this guy. So, quick aside. UK banks are bastards. I know there are people who probably work for UK banks, or maybe for Greek ones, but UK banks are all bastards. And not just because they won't give me an increased overdraft. Basically, what happens is if as a merchant you get ripped off, now let's say somebody sobs off with your CC database, you then contact your acquiring bank. Now, some banks will be nice. Some banks will say, yes, there has been fraud on these CCs, we're very sorry, let's work together about it. Some, however, usually the American ones, won't, because they cite data protection. You know, they say, oh, we can't possibly tell you anything because it affects our customers. Fuck off, Mr. Merchant, deal with it. Now, that said, if a bank works as both a payment provider and an acquirer, they'll usually play ball. But as I say, there are a number of banks that basically will not play ball with a merchant that's ripped off. Now, why do acquiring banks, or some acquiring banks, do this? Well, they're banks, and thus they are evil. Basically, if they don't admit any fraud to a merchant, the end cardholder has to prove that fraud happened. Everybody wins in that case, apart from the merchant and the cardholder. And by everyone, I mean the banks. This basically means that the system of fraud reporting in the UK is broken. You know, that's a lot easier to exploit than skimming or Trojans or crashing a stock exchange. You know, I won't tell you who the affected acquiring banks are in the UK, but if you really want to fund yourself as a terrorist, just find a bank that doesn't collaborate with merchants. Then rip off the merchants, and the bank says to the merchant, fuck off, your problem. So, quick one about a merchant. Did an on-site pen test for a merchant, fairly large merchant doing quite a decent trade in what they did. Their internal network was a bit flaky, but nothing major. They also decided they weren't going to have any NAC. They also decided they weren't actually going to detect any wireless access point that was plugged into their dodgy network, which meant that I could sit in the car park, crash their tills, or exfiltrate their data. It's basically TK Maxx Part 2. But yeah, this is fairly standard. You know, so it's not hard to do. Now, if you want to go after a stock exchange, because hacking stock exchanges is elite, you're going to have to exploit deficits within weird protocols like FIX or the Financial Information Exchange. Unless you work in a stock exchange, you'll never have fucking heard of it. There's a good paper that was presented weirdly at RSA called Hacking the Trading Floor, which is weird. It's full of all sorts of acronyms you'll never have heard of. Because you've never heard of these acronyms, I would ascertain or claim that most stock and trade-oriented frauds are internal. Look at the history, you know, the horse in cement stroke carbon trading thing that went down last year. I'd never heard of carbon trading, and before it went down, I presume most of you hadn't heard of carbon trading. Who the fuck has? Unless, of course, you're a carbon trader. There's also guys like Sergei Alienkov, who was employed by Goldman Sachs, who decided to sod off with their trading algorithm data. You know, internal threat as opposed to external threat. No dodgy guy in a cave in Afghanistan, some guy with a suit and tie was like, that might be useful. So, that said, if you're too lazy to hack or you're too poor and paranoid to purchase credit card details, so especially now that Shadow Crew and the like have been shut down, there are other ways and means. Pasty and Pastebin, etc. are littered with credit card details. So basically what you can do is do a quick rep, parse all the data, and there you go, credit card details. I did a quick survey, both Pasty and Pastebin rather, and found 15,000 current credit card details in one sitting, without using any scraping scripts, just, you know, pure requests for, do you have Visa? Oh, you have Visa. Of those, some are going to be fake, obviously. Some will almost certainly be flagged. Some will have been caned and there will be nothing there. Some will have been reported. Some, however, may work. Now, if you've got enough people and enough resource, then, you know, this is a viable option. You know, for example, credit card details, yay! You know, those will all expire later on this year. But, you know, that's the sort of shit you can pull off there without even trying. Now, I said, if you are actually a card, you keep things simple. You know, you find a reliable exploit, you exploit the reliable exploit by scanning for targets, and if the credit card data is held unencrypted, you wander off with it. Now, obviously, PCI DSS is going to stop that, obviously, because we all know that if you're a small merchant or a foreign merchant, you're really worried about DSS. Now, that mindset or that way of doing things was exploited as late as 2007. It's still going on. It's simple. It's easy to anonymize. You just need to know one exploit in Metasploit and happy days. It's easy to anonymize, and if the targets are broad enough, it's effective. That said, if terrorists really wanted to cause financial chaos, this is how they do it. You find a weak merchant. There are lots of them, but you find one. You obtain credit card data either by a physical attack on their premises or by finding a reliable exploit which you've deployed elsewhere. You then use only card data that belongs to non-helpful acquiring banks because, they don't like reporting fraud. You then profit and can buy all the tents that you want. So, flying the friendly skies. There's more to life than money, and air traffic control systems are a lot of fun. Air traffic control is largely busy moving planes around. That's what they care about. That's their job. They don't care about network security because their job is to keep planes in the sky. A guy called Reiter Kunkel, great name by the way, presented some awesome findings at DEFCON 17. Very US-centric, but very interesting nonetheless. When people talk about terrorists, making planes fall from the sky is one of the populist nightmare scenarios. Can I make planes fall from the sky? Now, in the UK, you've got an organisation called NATS, which is the National Air Traffic Control Services. That was set up as a private-public partnership in 2000 as a result of something called the Transport Act. As we all know, private and public partnerships work all the time. There's nothing that can go wrong with them, and people aren't just interested in profit. No. They've got 4 main operational centres, but they've also got separate air traffic control for 15 UK airports via a company called NATS Services Limited. How it breaks down, the Queen and her loyal subjects in government own 49%, BAA own 4%, and the airline group, which consists of 7 UK airlines, own the residual. So lots and lots of people involved in this, all with their own agendas. So, LinkedIn, awesome. By making very simple queries, I could find out the information security manager at NATS, lots of IS analysts at NATS, flight plan managers, infrastructure architects, the heads of safety, security, and program management. So the head of security, hello LinkedIn. Oh look, there you are. They're all named, and because of the way that NATS works, the very simple email format. So, for spear phishing purposes, piece of piss. So without using Maltega or any social engineering at all, what you can do is build a really detailed organizational chart for the air traffic control system in the UK. If you were doing a targeted attack, stage 1 is done. It's over. So all you've got to do now is make your O-Day. That said, NATS also use WordPress as a publishing platform for the web, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, really secure, no vulnerabilities in that at all. And obviously their web server wouldn't be connected to anything else, obviously. So, in regards to technology stack, what do ATC use? Well, last year, details were published about electronic flight data that was made by Frequentis and in use at Prestwick, and they're planning to roll it out elsewhere, but they're currently arguing with Thales. Electronic flight data systems are run on Wacom tablets, and it's used to track flights. Now, the Frequentis system is used in Nigeria, but obviously in the UK can't cope with the demands because, we have more planes in Nigeria and our skies are busier. NATS also in 2008 signed up to the Single European Sky Initiative. That uses its own technology stack. If you had enough time, you could probably deduce the data about what systems were in use from the technical specs that are out there. That said, if as a terrorist group you had sufficient funding or state support, you could also focus on hardware attacks, e.g. the Wacom tablets made in China, because all the shit is made in China. And the Chinese firmware, I'm sure, is fine, there's nothing there. Anyway, if you want to listen to ACC, you can. It's an offence under the Wireless Telegraphy Act, but, hey, listening to AM bands, what could possibly go wrong? You'll find the transmission frequencies there. One interesting thing, In the UK, we've also got the HAVQuick system, which is how military aircrafts communicate. Basically, HAVQuick is basically random radio frequency hopping, which makes it a pain in the arse to monitor, and also means that the most you pick up on is American pilots bitching that they haven't got laid lately. So, seeing is better than listening, something I call the porn paradox. Earlier this year, a guy called Ryan Dewhurst found some airport cams, actual cameras at airports pointed at runways. If you want to have a look at them, they're on flyineurope.b. It's highly unlikely they'll ever be used by terrorists because terrorists don't like looking at empty runways. But that said, it's probably not a great idea from a security standpoint, I would have thought. So one of the criticisms about this talk is that terrorists will ultimately turn to computers because physical attacks are really hard. You know, blowing shit up is getting increasingly difficult. Okay, fine, I can accept that, but let's look at airports. According to Intel Center, an Intel Center document published which documented airport attacks between 2000 and 2007, the following were the number of attacks, plots, or plans to sabotage airports or planes. In the UK and US combined, there was 18 attacks or potential attacks. In Pakistan, which is a much smaller geographical area than the UK and the US, there was 51. So, attacks are only hard for terrorists in the West, funnily enough. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. A, there's the increased security, and B, there's philosophy of terrorism, which is about gaining local support. You know, it's like the IRA. The IRA were really proficient at blowing pubs up in Belfast. The reason why they blew pubs up in Belfast was to remind the people of Belfast that the IRA were probably, you know, okay if you were their friends. Same with, you know, various organisations blowing up airports in Pakistan. It's simple. You play where you have the most bang for your buck. If you're looking to recruit, take out an airport in a place you're trying to recruit. So, quick word about Intel Center, who may or may not be insane. They're a US private company that was founded in 1993. They act, and this is awesome, as a private contractor for intelligence agencies. Intelligence agencies need private contractors now. Who knew? They've got a range of publicly available publications, including the terrorism incident reference for airports and aircraft. They're insanely expensive. It costs about $50 for a book like that big. And if you buy one, you will end up on a watch list. I guarantee it. So, quick one. Common nightmare scenario includes disruptions to communications. There's loads of focus on data and voice networks. Everybody's freaking out about VoIP. Nobody talks about older stuff such as X25. For those of you who don't know the X25 stack, it's an international packet switch data network. It was the first one deployed in the 70s, 80s, and it's still used now. X25 networks are owned and operated largely by national telco companies and also a couple of private operators, so we'll talk about later on. Said, if you want to play with X25, because it's no longer 1983, it's a pain in the arse. You need an X28 pad, you need a dial-up NUI, and you also need some way to make a dumb terminal play nice. Not easy, so why bother? Well, X25 is an old stack, thus it's very difficult to secure. You know, it doesn't play nice with IDS, doesn't play nice with IPS. You know, you can't put an IDS in front of the X25 network because the X25 network's like, I don't understand that. That wasn't made in 1983. Another thing that's good, if you can war dial a associated X25 number, you can basically brute force the authentication mechanism all night. And they won't be detected because it doesn't play nice with IDS. Additionally, lots of fun shit runs on X25. Example, Vodafone's bulk mail SMS operates via X25, or can. Does actually, but there you go. Now, according to conjecture, there's a number of other carriers such as Orange, 3, etc., that deploy X25 as part of their network backbone. Now, you've got effectively a deprecated stack running in environments where it may or may not be secure. Awesome. So, another interesting thing, the Greek National Lottery works over X25, which is interesting. So, you know, a deprecated protocol which you can't secure is controlling the lottery. Have fun. If you win, let me know. The ITU, International Telecoms Union, publishes details of data network ID codes. Basically, how X25 works is you need a data network ID code and a network user address, which, at most is 15 digits. X25 addresses are all reserved. They never change. The ITU says, okay, this is our shit. Don't touch our shit. How do you find the newer? You war dial it. We're back to war games again, people. What sort of stuff, in terms of DNIC, is still reserved in the UK? Well, you've got Vodafone, who I was talking about earlier, so you'll have SMS and data floating around on that. You've got Nomura, who basically are responsible for the London Stock Exchange. Nothing interesting there, I'm sure. However, the last one, this is how old ITU's data is. There's an organisation called Racal Telecom. Racal, if you don't know them, became Thales. Thales, if you don't know them, make bombs and baby-killing shit. That's what they do. But yeah, there's some fairly interesting shit still assigned. So, of course, terrorists will not spend their time dialing and brute forcing X25. Why would you do something that's fairly easy and which you're never going to get caught doing? Russian forces did it, though, in 2005. And closed countries like China and Iran might be interesting in terms of using their systems to do other shit on. That said, there's more lo-fi methods of disruption. Build a cell phone jammer. If you want to take down a comms network, build a very big cell phone jammer, put it in a van, park it in a city centre. Park 4 of them. Cover your attack. Awesome. So, there's also fraud with regards to comms. You can use open VoIP phones to sell minutes or dial premium rate numbers and finding them, not exactly hard. Go on Showdown, have a grep, have a dial, and there you go. You've got all the funding you need for your jihadi camping trips. So, local shit. How am I doing on time? Yeah, okay. Cross-site scripting. Simplest and most widespread of web vulnerabilities. That said, it can be indicative of deeper issues. If I was a terrorist, which I'm not, that's what I'd start with, because it's easy. Talking of which, Antenna, who I believe are a TV company over here, have cross-site scripting. Hellenic Defence Systems, who make bombs and shit, have cross-site scripting. This Athens Daily paper has cross-site scripting. Goodies, who make hamburgers, I believe, have cross-site scripting. The point is, finding that shit's not hard, but it may be indicative of other shit that's going on. Incidentally, if you work for any of those organisations, I didn't tell you because I don't speak Greek. Sorry. I also understand there's no, offences here or something. Anyway, agendas. I'll be quick. Apparently, the threat of cyber war is looming. Yeah? The UK government is developing cyber weapons because, obviously using Metasploit or Canvas is too difficult and they need to spend 650 million developing their own shit. Apparently, rogue states and political terrorist groups are coming to get us and we're all going to die. Why? Are attacks against computer systems increasing? Yes, because there's more computers. Are physical attacks, at least in non-Western countries, increasing? Yes, because in Western countries, they're hard to do. Do attacks make excellent press or sales strategies? Advanced persistent threat? Yeah. What can you do if you create an air of fear around basically an unsubstantiated and undefined threat? Well, in the UK, we've got the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which was set up in 2005, which makes it legal to detain terrorists without trial. You've got a situation where the UK Home Secretary can issue control orders for suspects, and those control orders can basically allow legal representatives to opt out of human rights law. If you're a terrorist, human rights no longer apply. Fuck you. We've got the Terrorism Act of 2006, which allows for 14 days detention without charge or legal counsel. A little bit worrying. We've got the Counter-Terrorism Bill of 2008, which plans to increase that internment to 42 days. So 42 days in a jail, no access to law, no charges brought. Our very own Gitmo, Perfect. Before I forget, we've also got Section 37 of the Police and Justice Act 2006, which, I quote, "A person is guilty of an offence if he supplies or offers to supply any article believing that it is likely to be used to commit or to assist in the commission of an offence." Basically, if you write exploit and it's used, you're guilty of an offence under the Computer Misuse Act. Awesome. That's going to help research, and the UK's gone really German now. So, we've got a really increasing surveillance state in the UK. We've got an ever-increasing array of laws. We've also apparently got terrorists. So, lots of laws, lots of surveillance, we still have terrorists. Now, interesting. In Russia, you can no longer buy a prepaid SIM card because they could be used by terrorists. This has been debated in the US, and if it happens in the US, where you can no longer buy a prepaid SIM, it'll come to the UK and, probably to Greece. This is one of the funniest things I've ever fucking read. 2010, Air Force Law Review. A guy called Colonel Patrick Franzes proposed that users wanting to access the internet globally could be required to use a biometric scanner before continuing. Okay, you're not insane. Now, these mechanisms may negate some of the threats of terrorism. And obviously, that's all they're going to be used for. Obviously, if you have to biometrically identify to a computer network before you can use it, that's not going to be used for any other purpose at all, is it? So, personally, I'm not scared of terrorists when it comes to computer-related attacks. I'm also not scared of terrorists anyway, because there's always going to be idiots with bombs. What I am genuinely terrified of is ill-informed knee-jerk reactions to it. My thing is, if you actually give a fuck about security, the important thing to do is to define the risk. And you can only do that once you remove the political and sociological engineering and all the agendas that go with it. Now, I've got no problem with people arguing about supposed threats, which I actually don't think are real threats. How many successful terrorist attacks, by a terrorist group, not a state, by the way, do you know of? None. Zero. Zip. Hasn't happened. But, by all means argue about that. But better to keep it based in reality. If there hasn't been an attack, okay, what are the risks of an attack? As a terrorist, what would you attack? If you were to attack it, what would be the effects of attacking it? Don't just make shit up and say that, the world's going to end in 15 minutes because of evil hacksaws that, are into jihad. It's bullshit, it's spurious, and it doesn't help. And I would like to close on a quote that the enemy is fear. We think it's hate, but it's fear. And that was said by Gandhi, who was assassinated by a terrorist. That may negate my argument somewhat. So, questions, comments, abuse, random suggestions, anything, go. Sweet, I've killed them. Nothing. Well, that sucks. Somebody argue. I'm good at arguing. Come on. Yeah? Fine, sod you then. So, thank you to the con organisers for having me. Thank you for getting up. If you want to contact me, by the way, with death threats or mail bombs, that's where. So, thank you all. And any questions at all? If you're too shy, I'll be out there drinking coffee and trying to look vaguely sane. Thank you.